You ever had a job where you felt like you started the job and they kind of threw you to the wolves? You're wondering, what happened to my training? And there you are, and you're kind of expected to jump right in and start working and doing things, and you feel like you're tossed in the pool to sink or swim, and whichever way you go is going to determine if you get to stay there. I mean, the title of the job that you were hired to do is probably explained in your interview, just in general what was involved in doing that job, but the details of that, it would be helpful to have a little help with that, right? To be shown what to do. Were you just thrown to the wolves, as it were? And when you're in a situation like that, being the new person, knowing that you're being looked at closely, it can be a little terrifying to kind of be standing there having to figure out what you're supposed to do. It can be distressing and frustrating. Well, Jesus, right before he ascended back to the Father, gave us something to do. He gave us a job. We saw that last week in Acts 1:8. You will be my witnesses, both close to home and to the ends of the earth and everywhere in between. You'll be my witnesses. And having said that, he lifted before their eyes and disappeared into a cloud. And I'm sure 11 guys standing there, well, they're pretty amazed that they just saw him rise into a cloud, but at some point they might be thinking, how are we going to reach to the ends of the earth? There's 11 of us here. And so as we've talked, we know that helps us to understand that Jesus was talking beyond those 11. And as he said in Matthew's version of the Great Commission, having said to go and make disciples of all nations, he has said, behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age, suggesting that this task will be done to the end of the age, and we're not doing it alone, and Jesus is with us. And since the 11 died about 2,000 years ago, the end of the age hasn't happened yet. We know that this task continues on for us as well. Yet, did Jesus just throw us to the wolves, as it were? Just say, you will be my witnesses, and then leave it at that? And so here we are to sink or swim? Well, he really didn't do that. We have his example recorded for us in the Gospels, and so we can look through there and say, what would Jesus do when we're in a given situation, and find our answer in the example he left for us that's recorded in the Gospels. We also have the rest of the Scriptures, which help us to understand how to go about this task of being his witnesses. And we're going to look this morning at a place that gives us a real good clue about it. And that's in this passage, Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16. Let me just read through that, and then we'll start looking at it together. This is in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Before we start looking at that, I know we were having trouble with this. Okay, I'm on, because I know these things are really hard to hear over. Okay. This passage does not lay out a gospel message for us to use. Often when the church talks about witnessing, we learn a way to present the gospel. And if you're in a church where evangelism explosion for example, is the evangelistic tool that church has chosen to use, you will be taught to ask people a question: if you were to die tonight, why should God let you into heaven? And then go from there. If you are part of Campus Crusade for Christ, which is now called Cru, you will be taught how to use the 4 spiritual laws. If you're part of the Navigators, you'll be taught how to use the bridge illustration. And I could explain all of those, but I'll just lay it out there. There are a number of different ways to present the gospel. And since we're looking at this passage this morning, we're going to look more at who we are and how we live in this world. Next week, I think maybe I will put out a brief explanation that could help you when you get an opportunity to talk to people. But for now, we're going to look at this issue of salt and light. We've been picturing this idea of being representatives of Jesus in terms of God's big picture plan for the world. And we saw that he began with this man Abram, whose name he would later change to Abraham, called him to go to where he had no idea where he was going. God was going to show him. God was going to give him the land that he showed him, was going to raise up a nation from Abraham, and through Abraham and his seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. That's the big picture. God wants to bless. People live under the curse of sin. God wants people living under blessing. And then we saw that Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that. Jesus is the way that all the families of the earth can be blessed, can have access to that blessing. Jesus, humanly speaking, came from the Jews who came from Abraham. And so all of that logically makes sense. Jesus came to this world, he did his ministry, he preached the good news of the kingdom coming, and he then died on a cross, rose from the dead, and gave this commission. And last week we saw just one little piece of that: you shall be my witnesses. And then he left. And here we are, living in the big picture. Last week we looked at stepping out in the big picture. When you step out, go out somewhere, who are you? You're a witness if you're in Christ. And for the next 2 weeks, we're going to look at life in the big picture. Life in the big picture. When we step out, what is it looking like as we live in the big picture of God's plan for the world? And so that's where we are this morning. For the child of God, living in God's big picture plan for this world, our commission is to be his witnesses. And if that's going to happen, if we're going to do that, then he needs to be seen in our lives. We can't be witnesses and go out and hide Jesus. Who's being witnessed to then? And so that's what we're looking at this morning. And our text is, usually you get 3 points. This morning you're getting 2. Our text is going to show us 2 essentials to letting Jesus be seen in your life and fulfilling this commission to be his witnesses. One essential thing to letting Jesus be seen in your life is to be distinctive from the world. To be distinctive from the world. Now that's what we're going to look at in terms of salt. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, and let me just jump in here for a second and say, some people say, well, salt never loses its saltiness, and so therefore Jesus didn't know what he was talking about, and therefore this whole Bible is wrong. You know, people say stuff like that. Jesus is not making a scientific statement about salt. Jesus is saying this long before the scientific method was developed, and our way of looking at things today is when you say something, we will pick it to death to make sure it's exactly, it fits with scientific evidence. Jesus is saying you're the salt of the earth, and if you're the salt of the earth and you're not being salty, then you're worthless as salt. That's what he's essentially saying. You're not being salt. He's not saying that salt can lose its saltiness. He's just making a point, not about salt. He's making a point about disciples, who we are as his witnesses. And so you're the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Now, salt, we use salt metaphorically in a couple of ways. You know, I've got this screenplay I wrote a few years ago. I keep tweaking it and sending it back into contests. And one of the judges that sent me some notes on it one time said that he would have liked to see some more salty language in it because it doesn't have any. And what he meant by that is profanity. And so we talk about salty language. Or we talk about somebody who lives down by the ocean being an old salt, you know. When I was growing up in Tampa, we had a sports guy on the CBS affiliate there named Saul Flashman. And his nickname was Salty. So they called him Salty Saul. Salty Saul Flashman. They never said his name without saying Salty on the front of it. And he wore this captain's hat, and he talked more about the local fishing spots in town than he did about any baseball or basketball or football scores. That's who he was. He was an old salt. Well, that's not what Jesus is calling us to. He's not calling us to salty language. He's not calling us to move to the coast and be old salts. He's using a different sense of the word salt. Salt was used in a couple of ways in the ancient world. One was to preserve meat. It would absorb the moisture out of the meat, and moisture is where the bacteria can breed, and so it would help to preserve the meat in an age long before there was refrigeration. But since Jesus is talking about salt losing its taste, I think he's using the other use for salt. That's what the illustration he's using, and that's the way we still use salt, and that is to season our food. It's a metaphor for how believers are to be seasoning in this world in which we live. Now, I have with me this morning perhaps one of the blandest food items you can eat. And it's a hard-boiled egg. Hard-boiled egg is a pretty bland thing by itself. And what do most people do when they go to eat a hard-boiled egg? Boy, I can really smell this thing. I don't know, you probably can't, but, well, they take salt. Oh, doesn't that look nice? And they salt it up, and then, sorry to eat in front of you. Oh, that's good. And then, thank you to my lovely wife for making the hard-boiled egg for us this morning. But that salt turns something that's really bland on its own into something that has a more vibrant flavor. And that's what salt does. We all know that. For salt to do that, it has to be distinct from the food. You know, I can't take crumbled up egg shavings or egg crumbles or whatever and shake them onto a hard-boiled egg and change the flavor of that egg at all. I'm just adding the same thing to it. It's going to be as bland as ever. Salt has to be distinct from the food that it is seeking to season. And if there's no difference between the salt and the food, the salt loses its usefulness. And this is the point Jesus is making about us as his disciples. To be a witness in this world, the believer must be like salt. The believer must be distinct. We can't just blend in and look exactly like everyone else nobody sees Jesus if that's what we do. Now, I'm sure we've all done color by number things at some point, and maybe at this point in life we're either helping kids or grandkids do those things. Could you go to the first slide? It should be a color by number. That's all one. Oh, I can see it up here. Oh no, that's the second slide. Can you go back up one? There you go. Now, if you just saw that without having seen the second slide, you look at that and just see a bunch of lines and circles and things. It's all one color. There's no distinctness to it at all. But now go to the second slide, add a little bit of green to that, and all of a sudden we have Christmas trees. Christmas trees with ornaments hanging on them. And so now the Christmas trees stand out. Okay, we can, I guess, have lights back up. Thank you. And if the whole picture is just one color, everything is just blending in and looking alike. But if the other color comes in, then we can see, beautiful Christmas trees. You can imagine those are not just Christmas trees, but beautiful Christmas trees. And so it takes the distinction of the green with everything else being blue to show us the trees. If you just blend in with the world, how is anyone going to see the beauty of Jesus? Now, I'm not talking about standing out to make yourself noticed. You know, that's what the world likes to do. I gotta be me, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And just let everyone see me. I feel so pushed down, and I'm going to break through and let everyone see me. You know, but it's not about that. It's not about showing ourselves. And it's not about having this Pharisaical kind of sense of superiority where I'm not only different from you, but I'm better than you because I'm different from you, you know? And I remember I went to a real hyper-fundamentalist college for a year, many years ago. And I remember a guy preaching in chapel there. This was a place where you weren't allowed to go to movies, and you know, your hair couldn't be over the top of your ear if you were a guy, and you couldn't wear blue jeans, and they even had trouble with a guy who rode a motorcycle to campus because motorcycles were associated with biker gangs and stuff, and I don't know, it's what the guy had to get around with, so I think they put up with it, but they didn't like it. And I remember one pastor speaking in chapel one day. He was a young guy, but I still remember him saying, I'm actually, I don't know if he used the word proud, but it was something like that I have never even seen the inside of a movie theater. I don't even know what it looks like in there, you know. And, you know, there was kind of a superiority that breeds when you're in an environment like that. Now, if you don't want to go to movies because of what Hollywood is like, or because you can't find anything that you feel like you're not compromising to go see, that's fine. That's fine. But to make a law of it, and it becomes one of the defining things of being a faithful believer, well, that's Pharisaical. And when you're in an environment like that, it leads to this idea of, I'm better than you because I don't do the things you do. So that's not what we're talking about here, that kind of attitude. And it's not about being different just for the sake of being different. There are lots of things the world does that we also do. You know, the world drives cars, the world goes to the grocery store, the world the world, I mean, I could be up here in 1950s attire. You know, some people would say that if you're wearing anything in style, then you're being worldly. I don't know if that's so prevalent anymore, but it used to be. That's all superficial stuff. This is more about blending in because you want to fit in. Blending in because you want to be accepted. And so I'm a believer, but these people are going to mock me and laugh at me or not accept me or something, and so I'll just kind of join in and live like they do and be just like them so I can get along in this world. And when we do that, our salt has lost its taste. We are not bearing witness in the world. But when we go into situations and maybe, yeah, I'm going to go out to pizza with all these people that I work with because I want to be a witness to them. And so I'm going to go have pizza with them, or I'm going to go bowling with them, or I'm going to play golf with this guy, or whatever it might be. And we go and we live in the presence of the world with humility and forgiveness and selflessness and generosity and faith and hope and love and the things that the Holy Spirit bears that kind of fruit in us, and things that model what Jesus was like when he was on this earth. Then we're being salty. We're being salty. We're showing the world something they aren't getting from each other. And whereas somebody is really down at work and everybody wants to avoid them because, man, what a downer. I came in a good mood. I don't want to catch that. You know, and if you go in the name of Jesus and sit down with that person, say, hey, what's up, man? You want to talk to somebody? And you're just there showing love. What a powerful statement that is. And that is salt, because it's different. It's different, not just for the sake of being different. It's different for the sake of Jesus. And that's what we're talking about here. But if you act just like the world, a gospel message that comes from your lips, you could come up with the most logical, unbreakable gospel message, and nobody sees it having any impact in your life. They aren't going to listen to it. So that's our first essential, is to be distinctive from the world. A second essential to letting Jesus be seen in your life is not to hide Jesus from the world. Now, these are two sides of the same coin, I admit, but there is a sense in which you can go into the world and act just like the world because you want to fit in. There's another sense in which you can go into the world and not act like the world, maybe live a more moral life or live by a biblical ethic or something, but nobody knows it has anything to do with Jesus because you hide him. And that's what we're talking about here. A second essential to letting Jesus be seen in your life is not to hide Jesus from the world. We go on, we read in verse 14, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. What exactly does it mean that believers are the light of the world? Well, you know, Jesus said of himself that he's the light of the world. In John 8:12, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so Jesus is the light of the world, and here he's telling his disciples, you are the light of the world. If we connect this to the idea of you shall be my witnesses, I think what we can say is Jesus is the light of the world because we belong to him, we show the light of the world, we witness to the true light of the world by showing his light in our lives. And that's how we are witnesses. See, he's the light. And along you come, and you, this is Picasso's version of you, and you don't know him, and there is no light within you. He's the light of the world. And then you come to faith in Jesus, and he comes into your life, and now his light is inside you, and should be able to be seen through you, like you can see the light shining through this cup. But we can, leave the house, step out into the big picture, and leave Jesus at home, and we step out and nobody sees the light. Which doesn't make sense, given what light is. Light, a city on a hill, Jesus says, cannot be hidden. That's because a city would have had lights on. Even throughout the night, there would have been light somewhere, torches or candles or stuff. And somebody approaching in the pitch black could see at least a little bit of illumination up ahead. And when the lights were on in the city cannot be hidden. That's why you hear about during World War II, in Britain, where they turned off the power when they knew the Nazi planes were coming, so the Nazis couldn't see the light down below. But when the lights are on in a city, it cannot be hidden. And when you light a lamp in a house, and back then it would have been lighting it with fire, so it would have been like an oil lamp. Who does that to light the house and then covers it with a basket so that it can't be seen? Who would do that? Nobody would do that. You're wasting oil. Why even light the lamp at all? But if there's light coming from the lamp, it's going to light the whole house unless you cover it up and try to stop it. A little bit of light can go a long way in the darkness. I have a couple of videos here. Has anybody ever taken a tour through a cave? And have you ever been in there and they turn the lights off and let you see what it's like? Okay, well maybe you don't even need this video, but I'll show it anyway. The first video is just a guy, I think he's a pastor maybe, he's reciting a poem about the Lord. I don't have the volume going because, we would only get a few words over here, but it's going to show you just how dark the cave is without light, and then he's going to strike a match. And then we're going to see darkness again, then you're going to see how he lights the cave where he's sitting and reciting his poem with just these little what do you call it, tea candles? Just little tea candles, a grouping of them, and how well you can see in that dark cave with those candles. So why don't you go ahead and show that first video. There you go. There's the guy. Notice you can't see anything. That's the cave without the light. I've got it looping now. And then he lights the match, and then he's got the candles, and you can see the difference that a little bit of light makes. Now I want you to hit the down arrow. Let's go to the next video. And these are some people touring a cave, and with all the a lot of places they've smoothed out the walk, but you got places where you got to step over things and through things, and you got to duck to get down through little entryways and things, or you'll cream your head on there. So there's all the rocks and stuff. All right, now hit down again. I got sound on this one. I'm going to turn the lights off. There's a baby getting distressed. Here come the cell phones. People who don't like the dark. Now, if you're in there and somebody does that, you can actually see faces and stuff. The camera's not picking that up. But I've been in where people start doing that, and you can see, and here come the lights, and the darkness is dissipated. And that's okay. We can get our lights back on now. Thank you. I mean, that's what light does when it shines into darkness. In a cave without lights, if you were in there far, and they weren't doing that just to show you what it's like, but the power went out, you would freak. You can't move anywhere. I mean, even if you find your way to the handrail, you don't know if your forehead's gonna hit some rock or something as you're trying to go through. It'd be an awful situation. You'd be desperate for light. Think of the world and where the world is in spiritual darkness. They don't know how desperate they are, and yet they are. And they grope around and they're looking for answers to questions that are deep within, and why, when they get what they thought they wanted, it doesn't satisfy, and all those kinds of things that are answered through the light of Jesus, which we have. Jules Verne really captured, I think, the distress that can happen in darkness. I'm going to read a passage from Journey to the Center of the Earth. He says, "I believe I did not hear the dull roar of the explosion, but the rocks suddenly assumed a new arrangement. They rent asunder like a curtain. I saw a bottomless pit open to the shore. The sea lashed into sudden fury, rose up in an enormous billow, on the ridge of which the unhappy raft was uplifted bodily in the air with all its crew and cargo." So they're on a raft, on a river, under the earth. "We all three fell down flat. In less than a second, we were in deep, unfathomable darkness. Then I felt as if not only myself, but the raft also had no support beneath. I thought it was sinking, but it was not so. I wanted to speak to my uncle, but the roaring of the waves prevented him from hearing even the sound of my voice. In spite of darkness, noise, astonishment, and terror, I then understood what had taken place. On the other side of the blown-up rock was an abyss. The explosion had caused a kind of earthquake in this fissured and abysmal region. A great gulf had opened, and the sea, now changed into a torrent, was hurrying along into it. I gave myself up for lost. An hour passed away, 2 hours perhaps, I cannot tell. We clutched each other fast to save ourselves from being thrown off the raft. We felt violent shocks whenever we were borne heavily against the craggy projections. Yet these shocks were not very frequent, from which I concluded that the gully was widening. It was no doubt the same road that Sasknussemm had taken, but instead of walking peaceably down it, as he had done, we were carrying a whole sea along with us. These ideas, it will be understood, presented themselves to my mind in a vague and undetermined form. I had difficulty in associating any ideas together during this headlong race, which seemed like a vertical descent. So all this stuff's going on, and he's in abject darkness. So he's trying to figure out and piece together what could be happening. To judge by the air which was whistling past me and made a whistling in my ears, we were moving faster than the fastest express trains. To light a torch under these conditions would have been impossible, and our last electric apparatus had been shattered by the force of the explosion. I was therefore much surprised to see a clear light shining near me. It lighted up the calm and unmoved countenance of Hans. The skillful huntsman had succeeded in lighting the lantern, and although it flickered so much as to threaten to go out, it threw a fitful light across the awful darkness. I was right in my supposition. It was a wide gallery, and the dim light could not show us both its walls at once. And yet, light came into that darkness and brought some understanding as to what was going on. There's distress, fear, just torn up inside with all that stuff going on. And the world faces that on a spiritual level, in spiritual darkness, without the light of the one who said, "Let there be light," and there was light, who would bring spiritual light into their hearts. And that's what we've been called to do, is bring that spiritual light. We are bulbs. We're bulbs, and we show forth the light of Christ into the darkness of the world. And for the sake of lost people whom the Lord loves, even as we were once lost before we came to faith in Jesus, even as we were once in darkness but have been moved into the kingdom of light, as it says in Colossians, we have been made the light of the world, to bring the ultimate light of the world, Jesus, into the darkness that covers the hearts of mankind. And how do we shine that light? How do we shine that light? Well, let me read a passage from Ephesians. Ephesians says, "Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good, right, and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord." That's from Ephesians 5, 9, and 10. All that is good, right, and true. By living out the things that are the things of God, the things that He calls us to, the things that would bring pleasure to Him, by walking in His Word, and of course keeping close accounts with Him, because we fail again and again in that, but we keep taking it to Him and confessing and moving on and representing Jesus in this world. We are bringing light to dark situations when we do that. And verse 16 in our text says, "In the same way let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." So as believers in Jesus, we do good works for His name's sake. We show love. We show forgiveness. We show generosity, selflessness, things that bring Him into the presence of others. And by doing the good works, we are shining the light unto them. And when they are able to see, and this is where we get opportunity to let them know often, that I'm doing this because of Jesus. I've had situations where, as an example, where I would be at a cash register and they gave me too much change and I knew it. And so I said, "You think you gave me too much change here?" And sometimes it's a young, new person and they're like, "Oh, my drawer wouldn't have balanced. I would have been in such trouble. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And I sometimes will say something like, "Well, you know, Jesus died on the cross for me. I figure I can give you a few cents back, that you gave too much to me." Now, that never has led to an ongoing conversation, but I got him in there, and maybe the Lord brings somebody else along later in the day or the next day or something, and it's just a seed that's been sown. And if we just be in that mindset of sowing seed, now I'm going to a whole different metaphor here, but just sowing seed wherever we go, looking for an opportunity just to somehow represent Jesus in a way that people might know that it's because of Jesus that we're doing this thing that's different than the way other people treat them. And the Lord can open opportunities for you to speak, or He'll bring somebody else along to reinforce that at another time. Next week we're going to look where Peter talks about always being ready to give an answer for the hope that we have. And that's what we're talking about. That if we let them see our hope, then they have a reason to ask us about it. And that sometimes will open doors to be able to speak to people about the Lord. When I was at seminary, I was part of a band that played talent shows. We played talent shows and a couple other unofficial things around the dorm. We just kind of had a lot of fun. And we called ourselves the Preach Boys, which intentionally sounds like the Beach Boys. We started off by writing parodies of Beach Boy songs. We eventually branched into songs by other people too, but we would write these parodies about dorm life and seminary life and looking forward to be pastors and all that stuff around Beach Boy songs. One of the songs we did one time was based on I Get Around. And I think we probably just kept the same name. It was about people who do a lot of church hopping, and they never settle anywhere because there's always something wrong with every church, so off they go to the next church. And in seminary, you talk about that particular issue a lot because you know you're going to face it. And so we did this song, I Get Around, and I had the guitar solo in there. And I don't know if you know, if you can hear that song going on there. So I had the guitar solo. And as we were setting up, the sound guy was having a little trouble getting everything working the way he wanted it to do. This was for the annual talent show. And so I wasn't used to performing live, so I said, you know, this amp I'm plugged into back here is really loud to me, so I think I'll be fine with just the amp, so you don't have to even bother running me through the sound system. So there I am, I'm playing and we're singing, and I do my solo, and I'm thinking, wow, this might be the first time I've ever soloed in front of people, you know, and I'm thinking it's awesome, and then afterwards I learned that nobody could even hear me. Nobody could even hear me, because what was so loud standing right in front of the amp did nothing 20, 30, 50, 80 feet out there into the audience with all the people in the seats. So I might as well not even have been there. Is that how we are sometimes as salt and light? Like we're not even there for Jesus, blending into the world, hiding Jesus from the world? That's not what we want to be. And, you know, we all hang out with people. Even if you're an introvert, you get forced into situations where you hang out with people. And when we are there, we represent Jesus because we belong to him. We are not our own. We've been bought with a price, the price of his blood. And so those are places where we just, I'm not talking about getting in people's faces, you know, cornering somebody and not letting them out until they say yes or no to Jesus and stuff like that. You know, I know there are people who witness like that. And I think there are people that have that kind of boldness, and that kind of boldness is needed. And I think God gives people boldness sometimes like that. But I'm just talking about being a person, hanging out with the people you know, being in situations around other people, and being salt and being light. Not blending in, not hiding Jesus, just being a Christian in front of them. And speaking when you get the opportunity. That's life in the big picture for the child of God. Standing out, not for ourselves, but for Jesus. That those who need him might have an opportunity to see him, and that he might be glorified. Let's pray.